The galaxy was filled with countless stars, and among them lived many civilizations. Some of these civilizations were strong and powerful, others were peaceful and quiet, and some were still very young in their journeys through the stars. One distant planet, a peaceful race lived in harmony. They were gentle people who spent their lives in study, art, farming, and building beautiful cities. Their world was filled with wide rivers, shining towers, and green fields where families laughed and children played without fear. For centuries, they believed the galaxy was a place where peace could always be protected by words and kindness. But peace is never guaranteed. From the dark edge of space, an invading fleet arrived. This fleet did not come to trade or share knowledge. They came to conquer. They were ruthless and cold, driven by hunger for power and control. Their ships filled the skies like a storm, blocking out the light of their sun. On the ground, the peaceful people could only watch in terror as fire rained down on their homes. Buildings collapsed, families fled, and the land that had once been filled with music and joy turned into a battlefield. These people were not warriors. Their history did not prepare them for this. For thousands of years, they had believed in solving problems through diplomacy. Disagreements with neighbors had been solved through councils and compromises. Weapons were only found in museums, stored as relics of a time long past when violence was still a part of their history. They never thought they would need to pick them up again. And so, when the invaders came, they had nothing with which to fight back. At first, they tried to reason with the attackers. Leaders sent messages begging for peace. They offered food, technology, even land if only the invaders would spare their people. But the invaders only laughed at these pleas. To them, weakness was something to exploit, not protect. They crushed city after city, enslaving those who survived and killing those who resisted. The peaceful race was trapped, their future closing in on them like a tightening cage. In desperation, the leaders of the planet gathered. They met in hidden shelters deep beneath the surface, where the enemy could not yet reach them. Their faces were filled with fear and despair, yet one small hope remained. They had technology that could send messages far into the galaxy. It was a call for help, a beacon that would travel faster than light, carrying their words across countless star systems. They knew the chance was small, but they had no other choice. So they prepared their message. It was simple, but heartfelt. They explained who they were, what had happened, and how they could not survive without aid. They spoke of children taken from their families, of homes burned to ashes, of a civilization about to vanish forever. They begged, not as rulers of a planet, but as living beings who did not want to see their people disappear. With trembling hands, they sent the signal out into the endless night. As the message sped into space, the people prayed silently. Some prayed to ancient gods, some to the stars themselves, and some simply whispered to their children, hoping someone, anyone, would hear their cries. In their minds, they imagined who might come. Perhaps wise philosophers from a distant, advanced world who could speak with the invaders and convince them to stop, or maybe a noble species of guardians who patrolled the galaxy, ready to protect those who were weak. The people dreamed of saviors who would arrive like angels, bringing peace back to their world. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The invaders did not stop. Whole regions of the planet fell under their control. The skies were filled with their machines, and hope grew dim. The people began to wonder if their message had even been received, or if it had simply been lost in the endless silence of space. Some believed no one would come. Others held on tightly to faith, telling their children stories that help was on the way, even when they themselves doubted it. Far away, beyond the edges of what the peaceful people had ever imagined, their message traveled. It crossed systems where stars burned red, worlds where ice covered everything, and places where life never had a chance to grow. It passed advanced empires who ignored it, not wanting to risk their power against ruthless invaders. It passed species too far away or too fearful to respond. And then, against all odds, the signal reached a small blue planet circling an ordinary star. That planet was called Earth. The people of Earth were unlike the peaceful race that had sent the message. Humanity's history was filled with struggle. From the moment they learned to walk upright, humans had fought against nature, against predators, and often even against each other. Their planet was one of storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, and dangerous animals. Survival on Earth had never been easy, and those who lived there had grown strong through hardship. When human scientists caught the signal, they were at first surprised. They had long wondered if other intelligent life existed in the galaxy. But here was proof, and not only proof, it was a plea for help. The words of the message, filled with desperation and pain, reached deep into the hearts of those who listened. Governments met, leaders argued, and questions were raised. Should they go? Could they even help? Would it be too dangerous? Some said Earth had enough of its own problems, but others said something different. If we ignore them, they will die. And if we can help, then we must. So humanity made a choice. Ships were prepared. Ships built for exploration, for defense, and for survival in the harshest conditions. Soldiers volunteered, not for conquest, but to protect those who could not protect themselves. Doctors, engineers, and aid workers joined the mission as well. They packed supplies, medicines, tools, and weapons. The journey would be long, but humanity had traveled long journeys before, across deserts, across oceans, and now across stars. The peaceful race that had sent the signal did not know any of this yet. To them, their message had gone into a vast and empty galaxy. They still feared no one had heard, and even if someone had, perhaps no one cared enough to come. Every day the invaders tightened their grip. Every day, more lives were lost. Yet, in the distance, a fleet of human ships was already on the way, crossing light years with determination and resolve. When the peaceful people imagined who might answer their call, they dreamed of gentle saviors, beings of wisdom and calm. What they did not know was that those who would come were something entirely different. They were called humans, children of a death world, survivors of endless struggle, a species that refused to give up no matter how dark the night. And soon, these humans would arrive. Far away from the burning world that had sent out its desperate message, Earth turned quietly around its sun. To the humans living there, life seemed ordinary. They worked, studied, built cities, and dreamed of the future. Yet Earth was never truly an ordinary place. Every part of the planet told a story of struggle and survival. There were deserts so hot that almost nothing could live there, and oceans so deep and dark that even machines struggled to explore them. Storms tore across the skies, volcanoes erupted with fire, and earthquakes shook the ground without warning. Humanity had been forced to adapt to all of this. Over thousands of years, humans had learned to live not by avoiding danger, but by facing it directly. The galaxy knew of Earth, but not in a friendly way. Among alien civilizations, Earth had been given a fearful name, a death world. That title came not from malice, but from observation. To beings who lived on calm, fertile planets where nature was gentle, Earth seemed terrifying. Predators with sharp teeth, diseases that spread unseen, poisonous plants, violent weather, all of these existed on a single world. To survive, there required constant struggle. Many alien scholars had studied Earth from afar and concluded that the beings who lived there must be violent, stubborn, and unpredictable. They warned others to keep their distance. Few wanted to risk contact with such a world. But humans did not see themselves that way. They saw Earth not only as a place of hardship, but as a home worth loving. To them, storms were challenges, but also beautiful displays of nature. Dangerous animals were threats, but also creatures to respect and sometimes even admire. The same volcanoes that destroyed land also created rich soil for farming. The same wild rivers that flooded towns gave life to crops. Humans had grown strong because of Earth, but they had also grown compassionate. Struggle had taught them the value of helping one another, because survival often depended not just on strength but on cooperation. When the distress call arrived, the scientists who discovered it listened in silence. The voice of the alien leaders carried across light years. shaking with fear and sorrow. They described how their people were being destroyed, how they had no way to fight back, and how they begged anyone, anywhere, to help. The scientists shared the recording with leaders of Earth, and soon the entire planet knew that they were not alone in the galaxy. Humanity had long dreamed of discovering other intelligent life, but no one had expected their first true message to be one of such despair. First, there was great debate. Some leaders worried that helping would be impossible. The invaders who had attacked this world might be far more advanced than humanity. Sending ships into the unknown could mean risking their own lives for a cause they did not fully understand. Others argued that it was not their problem. Humanity had fought wars of its own, solved its own crises, and built its own future. Why should they take responsibility for strangers so far away? Yet there were voices that refused to accept silence. These voices spoke not of politics, but of compassion. They reminded the world that the message was not only a plea, it was a cry for survival. Children were suffering, families were being destroyed, a whole civilization was facing extinction. And if humanity had the power to help, then it was their moral duty to try. Slowly, agreement spread. Scientists confirmed that reaching the world was possible. Engineers calculated the resources needed. Soldiers, doctors, and workers began to volunteer in huge numbers. Some of them had fought in wars on Earth and knew the price of conflict. Others were young and had never seen war, but they felt a fire in their hearts to do something greater than themselves. People donated supplies, medicines, and technology. Entire factories worked day and night to prepare ships that could travel far and survive harsh battles. Among the volunteers were not only fighters, but healers. Doctors stepped forward, determined to treat the wounded. Engineers signed up, ready to rebuild what had been destroyed. Teachers and scholars even offered to go, hoping they could help preserve the culture of a people who might otherwise vanish. Humanity was not sending an army alone. They were sending a force of survival, a mixture of strength and compassion. The alien world, still burning under the invasion, knew nothing of this. They believed their message had likely gone unheard, or that no one had cared enough to answer. But as they lost hope, humans were already preparing to cross the stars. In the halls of Earth's space agencies, plans were made. The fleet would not be small, for the task was great. Carriers were filled with soldiers trained in survival and combat. Medical ships carried advanced hospitals that could treat thousands. Supply ships stored food, water, shelter materials, and machines to restore power. Exploration vessels designed to endure the toughest conditions would serve as scouts and guides. Humanity was not coming quietly. They were coming prepared, ready to stand against whatever darkness had threatened the innocent. Before departure, there were moments of reflection. Families said goodbye to loved ones, uncertain if they would ever return. Children hugged parents tightly, not fully understanding the danger, but sensing its weight. Some volunteers recorded messages, saying that if they never returned, they wanted their families to remember they had left to help strangers who had no one else. There were tears, but also pride. For the first time, humanity was uniting not against each other, but for a cause greater than themselves. The day the fleet launched was unlike any in Earth's history. Massive ships lifted into orbit, their engines blazing like new stars. Crowds gathered in cities across the planet to watch the launch broadcasts. Billions of eyes turned to the sky, watching the ships vanish into the blackness of space. They did not know what would happen, but they knew they had chosen to act. For once, Earth was not sending explorers to discover new land or soldiers to fight their own battles. They were sending hope to another world. Meanwhile, the peaceful aliens on the other side of the galaxy struggled to survive each day. There, cities lay in ruins, families hid in caves, surviving on scraps of food. The invaders showed no mercy. Entire towns were enslaved, their people forced to work under cruel masters. Children cried out for parents who never returned. Leaders who had once spoken with confidence now sat in silence, their voices broken by despair. Their once beautiful world had become a place of ashes. In their hearts, most of them had given up on help. They told themselves that no one had heard, or that no one cared. But there were still small sparks of hope. A mother whispered to her child at night that someone was coming. An elder told a group of frightened refugees that the stars had always watched over them, and that they would not be abandoned. These were fragile hopes, but they were enough to keep them going. And far away, racing through the dark ocean of space, the human fleet was drawing closer every day. Inside those ships, soldiers sharpened their skills, doctors prepared their tools, and engineers checked their machines. Each of them carried with them the memory of Earth, a world of storms, fire, danger, and survival. They knew the galaxy called their home a death world, and they knew many feared them for it. But they also knew that everything Earth had taught them would now serve a greater purpose. The peaceful race who had sent the call did not know it yet, but their saviors were unlike anything they had imagined. They were not calm philosophers or angelic guardians. They were survivors, fighters, and builders. They were humans, and they were coming. The alien world was drowning in smoke and fire when the first new lights appeared in their sky. For months, the people had seen only the black shapes of enemy ships blotting out the sun. Now, streaks of brilliance cut across the heavens. They did not know what these lights meant, more invaders, or perhaps the end of all things. Families hiding in caves and bunkers pointed upward in fear and confusion. Soldiers of the enemy lifted their heads, readying weapons in case of rivals. The alien leaders watched from hidden shelters, their hearts pounding, not daring to hope. Then, above the clouds, massive shapes emerged. They were ships unlike any the people had seen before. Their designs were rougher, bulkier, and less polished than the sleek craft of the invaders. But there was something about them that felt powerful. They did not glide like hunters searching for prey. They moved with confidence as though they belonged to the sky itself. The invaders noticed immediately. They scrambled their fleets, sending fighters into the upper atmosphere to investigate. The peaceful aliens, still trapped on the ground, listened as the sounds of battle began to thunder overhead. Explosions shook the air and streaks of fire danced among the clouds. At first, the people thought they were simply watching two predators fighting for control of their dying world. Yet slowly they began to see a difference. The newcomers did not attack their cities. They targeted only the invaders. From the ground, survivors cheered weakly, not sure who these new warriors were, but grateful to see the enemy finally facing resistance. For the first time since the invasion began, the sky was not entirely controlled by the conquerors. A spark of hope lit in hearts that had nearly given up. The humans had arrived. When the first human ships broke through the atmosphere, their engines roared like thunder. Dropships detached and fell toward the surface. They carried soldiers, medics, and supplies. As they landed, clouds of dust rose around them. From within stepped beings that the peaceful aliens had never seen before, tall, upright, wrapped in protective armor, their faces hidden behind visors. They looked fierce, almost frightening, but their movements were purposeful. They scanned the area quickly, weapons ready, then began unloading crates of food and medical gear. The peaceful aliens stared in disbelief. At first, they did not dare approach. For so long, every stranger who arrived had brought only pain. Could these beings truly be different? A child, braver than the adults around him, stepped forward. He was thin, hungry, and covered in soot. He reached out toward one of the armored figures. The human soldier knelt, removed his helmet, and revealed a face, tired, scarred, but kind. He offered the child a piece of food, smiling softly. That small act broke the silence. The crowd surged forward, tears streaming down their faces as they realized help had truly come. The invaders, however, were not about to surrender their prize. Within hours, they launched full assaults on the landing sites. Waves of enemy troops marched across the fields, determined to crush the newcomers before they could gain ground. But what they met was unlike anything they had expected. Humans fought differently. The invaders were used to facing enemies who broke easily, who surrendered once overwhelmed, but the humans did not yield. Even when outnumbered, they fought with stubbornness that seemed almost unnatural. They used clever tactics, setting traps, using the terrain to their advantage, and adapting quickly to every attack. Where the invaders Advanced like machines, the humans moved like survivors who had faced countless battles before. The peaceful aliens watched in awe. They saw humans push back enemies with sheer determination, holding their ground even when it seemed impossible. When weapons failed, humans used their hands. When surrounded, they found ways to break free. The invaders, for the first time, looked uncertain. They had never faced opponents who refused to be broken. But what amazed the aliens most was not only how humans fought, but how they cared. Between battles, human medics rushed to tend to the wounded, not only their own, but also the alien civilians. They carried children from burning buildings, gave water to the thirsty, and patched up injuries with steady hands. Engineers worked to restore broken power lines and water pumps, even as the war raged on. Soldiers shared their food rations with starving families, sometimes giving away their own portions. The aliens began to whisper to one another. Who were these strange beings? Why would they risk so much for a people they had never met? When asked, the humans gave simple answers. One soldier told a frightened villager, "You asked for help, so we came." Another medic said, "No one deserves to be left alone in the dark." These words, spoken without pride or demand, carried more weight than any weapon. The invaders, furious at their losses, escalated their attacks. They sent larger forces, heavier machines, and more devastating weapons. Entire regions shook as battles spread. Yet with each clash, the humans grew more determined. They did not see themselves as saviors, but as allies standing beside the weak. Every step forward was won with blood and sweat, but they never stopped moving. One night, in the ruins of a city, a group of alien elders sat with human commanders. They asked, trembling, what kind of world the humans had come from. The answer left them stunned. The humans described Earth, its storms, its predators, its disasters. They spoke of history filled with wars, plagues, and struggles for survival. The elders listened in silence, realizing that these were not people shaped by comfort or ease. These were people shaped by hardship itself. Their entire species had been trained by their world to endure, to adapt, and to keep fighting no matter the odds. The aliens looked at one another with new understanding. They had prayed for gentle saviors. Instead, they had been given survivors from a death world. Yet, in that moment, they realized that perhaps this was what they truly needed. Not soft words, but strong hands. Not distant guardians, but allies, who understood what it meant to suffer and still stand. As days turned into weeks, the war shifted. The invaders, once confident, found themselves losing ground. Human fleets patrolled the skies, blocking reinforcements. On the surface, human soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with alien volunteers who had found courage again. Together they pushed the enemy back. Villages once destroyed began to rebuild. Families who had lost hope began to smile again, though faintly. The planet still burned in many places, but now the flames were not only of destruction, they were also of resistance. In hidden shelters, alien leaders wept openly as they watched broadcasts of humans carrying their people out of danger. They remembered the day they had sent their desperate signal, thinking no one would ever answer. And now, against all odds, strangers from across the galaxy had come. Not to conquer, but to stand beside them. The peaceful race began to learn something important. Strength was not always cruel. Power was not always evil. In the hands of these humans, strength and power were tools of protection. They realized that compassion and courage could exist together, and that sometimes the most fearsome warriors were also the kindest protectors. The battles were far from over. The invaders still held strongholds across the planet. The humans themselves had lost many lives already, yet for the first time, victory seemed possible. And in the hearts of the peaceful people, hope burned brighter than the fires around them. They had sent a call for help, expecting philosophers or angels. Instead, they had been answered by Deathworlders. And as they watched the humans fight, bleed, and protect, they began to believe that perhaps this was exactly who they had needed all along. After weeks of fighting, the alien world began to feel different. The fires from the invaders still burned in some regions and many cities were broken, but life had started to return. The humans were everywhere, not just as soldiers, but as helpers. They repaired buildings, dug wells, cleared rubble, and treated the wounded. They were not only fighting a war, they were teaching the people how to survive it. The peaceful aliens watched with growing amazement. They had spent centuries in quiet study, learning through books and conversations. They had thought wisdom meant gentle words and careful debate. Now they realized wisdom could also be courage, resilience, and action. Humans combined both. They could be fierce fighters in one moment and tender caregivers in the next. They healed what they destroyed, comforted what they protected, and never hesitated to act when someone was in danger. The children of the alien world began to follow the humans. They watched soldiers carefully handle weapons, not with cruelty, but with control and discipline. They observed medics tending to wounds with calm hands. They learned quickly how to help, how to support, and even how to defend themselves if needed. The aliens who had once hidden in fear now walked alongside these strange beings, slowly gaining strength and confidence. The adults, too, were changing. Farmers who had given up on their fields began to plant again. Builders who had thought the cities could never rise from the rubble now worked alongside human engineers, learning new techniques. Artists who had stopped creating because of fear began to paint and sculpt once more. The presence of humans inspired them to remember who they were and what their world could become. At the same time, humans were learning about the aliens. They studied their history, culture, and ways of life. They were careful not to impose their own ways, but to understand the world they had come to save. Soldiers talked to elders to learn about old customs. Medics learned alien medicines and healing practices. Engineers adapted their technology to work with local materials. Every human on the planet showed respect for the people they were helping, and in return, the aliens began to trust them completely. The alien leaders invited human commanders to meetings. They asked endless questions, trying to understand why humans had come, why they had risked so much. The commanders answered simply. "Because you asked for help," they said. And when pressed further, they added, "Because you were in danger, and we do not turn away from those who cannot protect themselves." These words, simple yet full of meaning, left the alien leaders silent. They had never heard anything like it. Their entire civilization had been taught that power could be dangerous, and that it should be used carefully. Yet here were beings with immense strength, wielding it only to protect. As the days passed, bonds formed. Humans ate with aliens, shared stories, laughed with them, and mourned losses with them. The peaceful race began to understand something profound. Strength could be gentle, power could be kind. The humans were not gods, not angels, not philosophers. They were something else, something extraordinary. They were survivors. And in their survival, they had learned the value of protecting others, of caring even in the midst of chaos. When the invaders launched counterattacks, the aliens saw the full extent of human courage. Soldiers faced overwhelming odds without hesitation. They used strategy, skill, and intuition, often thinking several steps ahead. When injured, they refused to stop until they ensured civilians were safe. Each battle taught the alien people something new about resilience, courage, and sacrifice. They began to take part in the defense themselves, guided and inspired by humans. For the first time, the peaceful aliens believed they could fight for their home, and perhaps even win. In quiet moments, leaders reflected on what had happened. They remembered sending the plea into the galaxy, unsure if anyone would respond. They remembered praying, hoping, fearing. And now they realized something incredible. They had received not the help they expected, but the help they needed. Gentle words could not have saved them. Philosophers could not have stopped the invaders. What saved them was strength born of struggle, tempered by compassion. The humans were both warriors and guardians, and their presence had changed the world entirely. Children began to imitate humans in play. They built mock defenses, practiced helping the wounded, and learned how to think quickly in danger. Teachers incorporated lessons from the humans into their lessons, teaching survival, strategy, and courage. The peaceful aliens began to understand that survival was not only about avoiding danger, It was about standing strong, thinking clearly, and caring deeply for one another. By the end of the month, the alien cities were partially rebuilt. Streets that had been filled with rubble were now busy with workers and children. Markets reopened. Schools welcomed students once more. People who had lost hope smiled again, realizing that life could continue even after devastation. And everywhere, humans were present, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as partners, allies, and friends. The alien world had learned a vital truth. Help sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. The beings who had arrived were not the gentle saviors they had dreamed of, but they were better. They were strong, fearless, and compassionate. They had come because they understood struggle, and because they had seen a plea for help and refused to ignore it. In the darkest days of fear and despair, these humans had shown them that hope could survive and even flourish. By the time the final battles approached, the peaceful aliens had grown confident. They fought alongside humans, not as pawns, but as partners. They had learned courage, strategy, and resilience. They had learned that strength and kindness could exist together. And when the last invader was finally defeated, they stood together with humans, victorious and whole in spirit, if not yet fully in their cities and homes. The war had ended, but the work had only just begun. The alien world was scarred, its cities broken and its people weary. Fires still smoldered in some regions, and many families had been lost forever. Yet among the rubble something new had grown. Hope. And it was carried not only by the aliens themselves, but by the humans who had stayed behind. Humans worked tirelessly to help rebuild. They brought supplies, technology, and knowledge, but more importantly, they brought determination. Hospitals were established, and the wounded were treated with care. Schools reopened, and children who had spent months in fear began to learn again. Engineers helped restore power to cities, repaired water systems, and taught the locals how to maintain them. Farmers planted new crops with guidance from both humans and their own elders, ensuring food would be available for everyone. The aliens watched in wonder. They had never seen such dedication, such endless energy, and such pure intent. Humans did not ask for rewards or titles. They did not seek praise. They came because it was the right thing to do. Slowly, the aliens realized that this was what made humans different from everyone else they had known. Humans had been forged by struggle, tempered by danger, and shaped by hardship. They understood suffering and acted to relieve it, not for glory, but because it was their nature. Children laughed again, running through streets where soldiers once fought. They played with humans, learning new games, hearing stories of Earth, and seeing firsthand what it meant to be brave. They learned that strength could protect, that courage could inspire, and that kindness could be as powerful as any weapon. These lessons would shape their generation, giving them the tools to ensure their world would never again be so vulnerable. The adults, too, began to change. They worked alongside humans in building, planning, and leading. Leaders who had once doubted their ability to act now guided reconstruction with confidence. Citizens who had hidden in fear began to contribute to every aspect of rebuilding. The presence of humans showed them that even in the darkest times, action could create hope, and that hope could become reality. For the humans, it was not easy. Many had lost friends and comrades in battle. Every day brought challenges, from logistical problems to lingering attacks from small enemy groups. Yet they did not falter. They treated every problem as something to solve, every obstacle as a challenge to overcome. Their resilience inspired the alien population, teaching them that determination and patience could achieve what once seemed impossible. Over time, cultural exchanges began. Humans learned the language, arts, and traditions of the alien world. Aliens learned about Earth, its history, its struggles, and its ways of survival. Together they shared stories, songs, and lessons. Walls that had once separated species began to disappear. Trust was built not only in moments of life and death, but also in simple acts, sharing meals, telling stories, and helping one another. The alien leaders reflected on the past months. They had sent a call for help, expecting gentle words and guidance. Instead, they had received strength, courage, and compassion in action. These humans were not what they had imagined, but they were far better. They had taught the aliens something fundamental, that true power is not measured by what one can destroy, but by what one can protect. That true courage is not only facing danger, but helping others to face it as well. That hope is strongest when it is shared, when it grows from the actions of those willing to risk themselves for the sake of others. As reconstruction continued, bonds grew deeper. Families who had low